Elon Musk, a man known for rockets and electric cars, walks into a small fishing town in Maine. A clash of worlds, skepticism, and ultimately, a lesson about progress and respect. The morning fog clung to the docks of Rockport, Maine, casting a silvery veil over the boats bobbing in the harbor. The scent of salt and fish filled the crisp air as fishermen, wrapped in thick flannels and rubber boots, hauled in the first catch of the day. This was a town where work started before the sun and conversations were short, built on years of understanding rather than the need for words. Down the weathered Main Street past the bait shops and gear sheds sat Annie's Wharf Tavern, a decades-old staple where the coffee was strong, the chowder was thicker than seawater, and newcomers were rare. The deep hum of an unfamiliar electric engine cut through the morning quiet as a matte gray Cybertruck rolled into the gravel parking lot, its futuristic design looking almost alien against the backdrop of rusting pickup trucks. The door opened, and out stepped Elon Musk, dressed casually in jeans, a simple jacket, and a worn navy cap perched on his head, a gift from a retired engineer. Though few here would know that. He didn't expect to be recognized in a town like this, and that suited him just fine. Today he was here not as the billionaire entrepreneur behind Tesla and SpaceX, but as a traveler, stopping for a quiet meal before heading to a nearby research site. As he stepped inside the tavern, the warmth of the wood-paneled walls and the scent of frying bacon and fresh biscuits wrapped around him like a familiar embrace. The place was nearly empty at this hour, save for a couple of older fishermen hunched over steaming mugs of coffee at the counter. A faded map of the Atlantic hung above the bar, its edges curling from years of moisture, while a sign over the register read, "No politics, no credit, no complaints," a motto that spoke volumes about this place. Musk slid into a corner booth, his back to the wall, and glanced over the handwritten menu on the chalkboard. Lobster roll, haddock chowder, blueberry pancakes. He ordered a coffee and a plate of pancakes from Annie, the tavern's no-nonsense owner, who had seen all kinds pass through but never someone quite like him. As he stirred his coffee, enjoying the anonymity, the tavern door swung open with force, the bell jingling sharply, and in walked a group of lobstermen, fresh off the water. Their heavy boots thudded against the wooden floor, their presence filling the space with an energy Musk hadn't expected. The moment the lobstermen walked in, the energy in Annie's Wharf Tavern shifted. The once quiet hum of the morning was replaced by the gruff voices and heavy laughter of men who had spent the last 10 hours at sea. Cal Buchanan, their leader, strode in first, shaking off the lingering chill of the ocean breeze. His beard was thick, flecked with gray, and his hands bore the deep calluses of a man who had spent a lifetime hauling traps. Behind him followed Jake, a burly dock worker with forearms like rope coils, and Rory, the youngest of the crew, his sharp eyes always looking for something to challenge. The rest of the crew, men with sun-creased faces and sea-weathered jackets, spread out, some making their way to the counter, others finding seats by the windows. Cal's sharp gaze swept across the room, noting the familiar faces, the regulars hunched over their steaming mugs, Annie refilling the coffee pot behind the bar, the quiet rhythm of the place as steady as the tide. But then his eyes landed on the man in the corner booth, a stranger, not just any stranger, but one who sat too casually, too unbothered, dressed in a way that didn't quite fit. And then there was the truck outside, the one that looked more suited for a science fiction movie than a fishing town. Rory followed his gaze and let out a low whistle. "That's a Cybertruck, isn't it?" he muttered to Jake. "And that's—" "Yeah, I see him," Jake grunted, cracking his knuckles. "Elon Musk." The name carried weight, even here. Musk wasn't just a businessman, he was a symbol of something bigger. Progress, disruption, change. And change wasn't always welcomed in a town where tradition ran as deep as the waters they fished. Cal wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but he had a gut feeling that men like Musk didn't just wander into places like this without a reason. He exchanged a glance with Jake, then sauntered toward Musk's booth, boots thudding against the worn wooden planks. "Morning," Cal said, his voice low and steady. "You from around here?" Musk glanced up from his coffee, meeting Cal's stare with the kind of calm that made men uneasy. He shook his head. "Just passing through." The lobstermen weren't convinced. In a town where every stranger had a story, they wanted to know exactly what Musk's was. The room held its breath as Cal Buchanan pulled out a chair and sat across from Elon Musk, his weathered hands resting on the table. The other fishermen didn't sit, but they hovered nearby, their presence looming like a storm rolling in off the Atlantic. Annie, who had been wiping down the counter, slowed her movements, her keen eyes flicking between the men. She had seen enough bar fights start with a simple misunderstanding, and something about the weight in the air told her that words today would be sharper than fists. Jake crossed his arms, his stance wide and solid. "People like you don't just pass through," he said, voice edged with suspicion. "What's a billionaire doing in a town where folks are just trying to make a living?" Musk stirred his coffee, unfazed. "Having breakfast," he answered simply, taking a sip. The response didn't sit well with Rory, the youngest of the group, whose sharp eyes darted toward the Cybertruck parked outside. "Nah," he said, shaking his head. "You're here for something. That truck ain't exactly subtle, and neither is your name." Cal let the silence stretch between them before leaning forward slightly. "You here to buy up the docks? Turn them into some AI-run operation? Or maybe you're just scouting, figuring out which part of our industry to automate and sell back to us at a price we can't afford." There it was, the real concern. These men had spent their lives battling the elements, fighting against regulations, unpredictable markets, and now looming automation. They had heard about self-driving trucks replacing long-haul drivers, factories running without hands, and now Musk, the man at the center of it all, was sitting in their town, drinking coffee like he belonged. Musk set his cup down, his gaze steady. "I'm not here to replace anyone," he said. "I'm here because I think innovation should work for people, not against them." Jake scoffed. "That's what they all say. Then the machines show up and suddenly a whole generation of workers is out of a job." Musk tilted his head, considering. "What if I told you that technology could actually help you fish smarter, that it could predict the best locations, save fuel, and make your job safer?" Rory let out a dry chuckle. "You think we need a bunch of computers to tell us how to do what we've been doing for generations?" "I think you know your work better than anyone," Musk said evenly. "I also think there are ways to make it easier, more profitable, and more sustainable." Cal studied Musk carefully. The man wasn't flinching, wasn't talking down to them like most outsiders did. There was something measured about him, like he wasn't just selling a dream, he believed in it. The other fishermen exchanged looks. The tension hadn't broken, but something had shifted. Musk wasn't backing down, and for the first time, neither were they. The silence in Annie's Wharf Tavern was thick, the kind that only came when men were weighing their next words carefully. The fishermen weren't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like Elon Musk, a man who had built rockets, electric cars, and companies most of them had only heard about in passing. But Musk didn't come off as arrogant or dismissive. He wasn't laughing at them, wasn't brushing off their concerns, and that alone made Cal pause. Still, he wasn't ready to let his guard down just yet. "You talk a good game, Musk," Cal said, crossing his arms. "But every time people like you come into towns like this, you don't leave things better, you leave them changed. And not always in a way that works for folks like us." Musk leaned back in his chair, unfazed. "Change isn't the enemy," he said simply. "The problem is when change happens without you, instead of with you." That got a few nods from the younger fishermen, but Jake remained skeptical. "Yeah? Tell that to the guys who lost their jobs when some machine replaced them." Musk nodded, acknowledging the point. "You're right. Automation has disrupted industries, some in ways that weren't fair. But what if I told you that instead of taking jobs away, technology could make your work easier, safer, and more profitable?" Rory scoffed, leaning against the counter. "We've heard it before. Next thing you know, they'll have AI tracking the fish, robotic boats pulling the traps, and guys like us will be sitting at home watching some drone do what we've done for generations." Musk smiled slightly. "You're assuming technology's goal is to replace people. It's not. The best technology enhances skill. It doesn't erase it. Think about the first fisherman who used sonar instead of guesswork, or the first boat with an engine instead of just sails. That wasn't the end of fishing, it was the start of a better way to do it. Cal narrowed his eyes. "And what exactly are you saying you can do for us?" Musk took another sip of his coffee, then set it down carefully. "I'm saying that we have real-time ocean data that can help predict lobster migration. We have AI systems that can detect illegal overfishing before it wipes out your stock, and we have energy solutions that could help you run boats cleaner and cheaper." The room was still, the weight of his words sinking in. Annie, who had been quiet behind the counter, finally spoke up. "And let me guess," she said, her voice wry, "this all comes with a nice fat price tag?" Musk chuckled. "It comes with an invitation," he said. "I've got a research site up the coast. If you want to see what we're actually doing, not just hear about it, you should come." The lobstermen exchanged skeptical glances, but there was something different in their eyes now. They weren't convinced, but they were curious, and in a town built on hard work and hard truths, curiosity was sometimes enough to start a real conversation. The tension in Annie's Wharf Tavern hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted. The fishermen were no longer just challenging Musk, they were listening, even if they wouldn't admit it outright. The skepticism still hung in the air, thick as the morning fog outside, but now there was something else mixed in: curiosity. Cal Buchanan, still leaning on the table, drummed his fingers against the wood, thinking. "So, let's say we believe you," he said slowly. "Let's say you really got something that can help us. What's the catch?" Musk shrugged. "No catch, just an invitation." The fishermen exchanged glances. Rory raised an eyebrow. "Invitation to what?" Musk leaned forward slightly, his tone measured but confident. "I've got a research facility up the coast about 20 minutes from here. We're testing ocean tracking systems, clean energy for fishing boats, and real-time monitoring tech. You don't have to take my word for anything. Come see for yourselves." Jake let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "Right, you expect us to just hop in that futuristic truck of yours and take a field trip?" Musk smirked. "It's either that or we keep sitting here talking in circles." He let the words settle, then added, "Look, I get it. You don't trust me. I wouldn't trust me either if I were in your shoes. But if you're willing to spend an hour arguing about what I'm doing, why not spend an hour actually looking at it?" Cal's sharp blue eyes studied Musk, weighing the proposition like a man measuring the weight of a lobster trap before deciding whether to haul it in. He glanced around at his crew. Jake still looked skeptical. Rory, on the other hand, was clearly intrigued, even if he was trying to hide it. The rest of the men weren't saying much, but none of them had outright refused. Finally, Cal sighed, rolling his shoulders back. "Fine," he said gruffly, "but let's get one thing straight. If this turns out to be some corporate sales pitch, we're out." Musk nodded, a small grin forming. "Fair enough." As the fishermen finished their coffee and grabbed their coats, Annie watched the scene unfold with mild amusement. She leaned on the counter and called out, "Just don't let 'em put a microchip in your heads." The room erupted in laughter, and just like that, the first wall between them had started to crack. The Cybertruck rumbled down the narrow coastal road, the sea stretching endlessly to the east, its waves breaking against the rocky shore. The fishermen sat inside, packed tightly in the futuristic cab, their usual rides consisting of rusted pickups or sturdy fishing boats, not sleek silent machines that felt more spaceship than truck. Rory kept his hands folded across his chest, his eyes darting over the screen-filled dashboard, while Jake muttered something about missing the sound of an actual engine. Cal remained quiet, staring out at the rolling coastline, his mind already working through what they were about to see. After a short drive, the truck pulled up to the SpaceX Marine Research Facility, a gleaming complex that stood in stark contrast to the weathered docks they had come from. The building, all steel and glass, reflected the sun off its clean, modern surfaces, its large bay doors opening to reveal a vast workspace inside. High-tech drones, solar-powered buoys, and prototype electric fishing vessels lined the dock, surrounded by engineers and researchers in bright blue jackets, marked with the SpaceX logo. The lobstermen stepped out hesitantly, their boots thudding against the clean concrete. "This," Musk said, motioning to the facility, "is where we're working on solutions that could help guys like you." The fishermen exchanged skeptical glances but followed Musk inside. He led them past rows of advanced sonar tracking equipment, explaining how it could pinpoint lobster migration patterns with greater accuracy than any fisherman's best guess, helping them avoid wasted trips and unnecessary fuel costs. A live data screen displayed real-time ocean temperatures, currents, and fish movement, the kind of information that normally took years of experience to interpret. "Think of it like this," Musk continued. "You've spent decades reading the ocean. We're just giving you better glasses." Rory, despite himself, stepped closer to one of the displays. "And this is free?" Musk chuckled. "Not free, but affordable. We're working on ways to make it accessible to independent fishermen, not just corporations." Even Jake, the staunchest skeptic, was silent now, his arms no longer crossed. Cal stood at the edge of the dock, staring out at the test boats equipped with electric motors, his mind clearly turning over what he'd seen. For the first time since they'd met Musk, none of them had anything to say. The fishermen lingered in the research facility, the weight of what they had seen settling over them like the early morning fog on the docks. Cal Buchanan stood with his arms crossed, staring at the electric fishing vessel bobbing gently in the test tank. His whole life had been spent on boats powered by roaring diesel engines, their fumes thick in the air, their decks worn by decades of hard labor. "You're saying this could actually work?" Cal's voice was quieter now, not challenging, just thoughtful. Musk nodded. "It's already working in test runs. Less fuel, fewer breakdowns, and it doesn't change the way you fish, just the way the boat runs." Jake, who had been skeptical from the moment Musk walked into Annie's tavern, shook his head with a reluctant chuckle. "I'll admit I thought this was all a bunch of billionaire nonsense," he said, "but I can see how some of this could be useful." Musk smiled. "You don't have to agree with everything I do, but if something can help, shouldn't it at least be worth a conversation?" Rory ran a hand through his hair, still absorbing it all. "So what's stopping this from being just another thing that drives up costs for small guys like us?" Musk leaned against a workbench, looking at each of them in turn. "That's why you need to be part of it. The people who know the ocean best should have a say in how this technology works. Otherwise, it's just another outsider making decisions for you." Cal exhaled, shaking his head with a smirk. "Never thought I'd say this, Musk, but you make a good point." The rest of the crew exchanged glances. They hadn't walked into this expecting to be convinced of anything, and while they still had their doubts, there was a crack in the wall of resistance. Musk clapped his hands together. "So, are we talking about the future of fishing, or are we heading back to the diner to argue some more?" That got a laugh. Even Jake chuckled, shaking his head as if he couldn't believe it. Cal glanced back at the water one last time, then turned toward the truck. "All right, Musk," he said, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Let's get some chowder." The conversation wasn't over, but it was no longer a fight. The drive back to Annie's Wharf Tavern was quieter than before. The fishermen weren't arguing, nor were they cracking jokes. They were thinking. The research facility had left its mark, and though none of them would say it outright, something had shifted. Cal Buchanan stared out the window, watching the waves roll against the craggy shoreline. Rory tapped his fingers against his knee, glancing at the sleek digital display in the Cybertruck, his mind clearly turning over possibilities. Even Jake, who had been the most resistant, looked less like a man eager to prove Musk wrong, and more like one considering the impossible. When they pulled back into the tavern's gravel lot, the Cybertruck's quiet hum came to a stop, once again looking completely out of place among the rusted pickups and weathered old boats in the distance. The fishermen climbed out, boots crunching on the dirt. Musk leaned against the side of the truck, arms crossed, watching them carefully. He knew this was the moment that mattered, the moment where curiosity either turned into action or faded back into old habits. Cal turned, his sharp eyes scanning Musk like he was still trying to figure him out. Finally, he extended a calloused hand. "I still don't trust guys like you," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind, "but I respect a man who's willing to listen." Musk shook his hand firmly. "I don't expect trust overnight," he said, meeting Cal's gaze without hesitation. "But I do believe in proving things. And if any of you ever want to see more, my door is open." Jake let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "Hell, I never thought I'd say this, but I'd be curious to see where this all goes." Rory smirked. "Yeah, and if Musk ever figures out how to make lobster traps haul themselves, maybe we'll really start listening." Musk laughed. "Give me a couple of years." The fishermen climbed onto their bikes and into their trucks, heading back to their lives, but with a different energy than before. Cal was the last to leave, giving Musk a final nod before kicking his truck into gear. As Musk slid back into the Cybertruck, he let out a small breath. Progress didn't happen all at once. It started with a conversation, and today, that conversation had begun. The story of Elon Musk and the Fisherman teaches a powerful lesson about perspective, innovation, and the importance of conversation. At its core, it highlights the tension between tradition and progress, showing how skepticism toward change is often rooted in experience, not ignorance. The fishermen, who have spent their lives relying on hard work, instinct, and generations of knowledge, initially see Musk as an outsider, a symbol of disruptive technology that threatens their way of life. However, through dialogue rather than confrontation, both sides begin to see common ground. Musk doesn't try to force change upon them. Instead, he listens, explains, and offers them a chance to experience innovation for themselves. In turn, the fishermen, despite their doubts, recognize that technology doesn't have to erase the past, it can enhance it. The lesson here is simple. Progress isn't about replacing people, it's about giving them better tools to succeed. When different worlds collide, the key to understanding and growth isn't resistance, but willingness to listen, ask questions, and remain open to possibilities. In a rapidly evolving world, collaboration, not division, is what leads to real progress.